Thank you for your leadership. You know, this education program and this program year is fulfilling the International's mission. And we have our guy, McKeel Haggerty, leading International. How about McKeel Haggerty? He is putting an imprint on this organization, and the mission, if you don't know it, is to build leaders through lifelong learning and networking. So today we are fulfilling that mission. And I know by and large YPOers are curious and they're lifelong learners. As John just quoted, I'm going to quote another smart guy, Einstein. He says, "I have no special talents. I am passionately curious." And I think that says who we are and why we're here today. And I'm thrilled to have not only my advisor, but my good friend Joe Caruso, who John already said he's an expert in the individual and the collective mind. And we're going to drill into that in a little bit. But you know, as John and I met a few months ago talking about this, I said, how about if I bring Joe? You know, we can do something really fun with this. You guys have seen hundreds of presentations in your YPO history and career, and so we're going to change it up a little bit. But Joe, welcome. I know you've done a lot of YPO gigs, but this is super special to have you here. So thank you, Joe Caruso.
This is fun. Thank you.
So I met Joe 2.5 years ago. I was at the Fortune Growth Summit, and I went there with one objective. I went there to hire an outside advisor because I wanted to build an adjacent strategy to take my business in a new direction and build a new business model to add on to the work we were already doing. We had just heard a professor from the London School of Economics speak on pivot strategies and a Plan B scenario to grow your business. When Joe, who was there with another colleague of ours, came up and introduced himself to me and asked me what I was working on, I told him exactly that I was here to hire or interview some advisors, and I was working on an adjacent strategy. At the same time, I was interviewing a pretty famous outside strategist by the name of Kyan Krippendorf, and I had another gentleman on my shoulder who thought he was going to be doing the work as well. But I think to frame why I hired Joe Caruso is really important because it sets the stage for today. One, the quality of his questions made me think like I never had before in my life. He made me think completely differently. And he showed a sincere interest in me and my business. Secondly, once he had those question answers, his ability to get up to speed on me as an individual and my business like nothing I'd ever seen before. Part of that you'll see today. Thirdly, he didn't work like most consultants that bring their methodology and plug it in at every single business they go to. He works more like a doctor, where he assesses the patient's needs and then prescribes a course of action from there. And I would know, you know, I know, and you know, I already mentioned McKeel Haggerty, who we'll talk about a little bit later, but 201, the people I know that are personally using Joe as an advisor have made dramatic changes in their business, dramatic changes that they would not have made if it wasn't for Joe being involved with them. So thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So just a look, huh?
Am I done?
Yeah, you can go home now. John gave us John gave us Shakespeare. I gave us Einstein, and you know what can you do with that?
I don't know.
But just a real quick, you know, where my course of action with Joe was really to understand myself as a leader and how I looked at my company, and then we looked at our leadership group and to understand them. And our approach to that was to do a classic off-site retreat, right, where we go do ideation and strategy and think. And our results fell far short of our expectations that day. We were talking about adjacent strategies, and we were just not getting what we were looking for. Joe took me aside afterwards and said, "Mark, you might have some good subject matter experts in the room, but you don't have one strategic leader in this group." So with Joe's help, I went and hired a president who has brought me that adjacent strategy, has allowed us to pivot and build a new business model that is building value in the company at a much faster rate than our core business. So it's been a lot of fun. Joe continues to work with my president, my leadership team, and me, And I know that some of you in the room use him as an advisor as well, and some of you have seen him on the cruise as well. Can we just get a show of hands of people that have seen Joe and could maybe give the speech as well? So there's 3, maybe 8 people. So this is new for a lot of you. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not going to be a presentation, so there's a surprise perhaps. It's going to be an interview. Hopefully I'll do a little better job than Lester Holmes was able to do last night in the debate. But you can be the judge. But we're curious. We're lifelong learners. So it's just not just me that is going to interview Joe, because you'll see out of the questions we're certainly become lots of rich material about the mind, about how it applies to leadership development and growing companies. But we would like all of you to be part of this interview too. So don't be shy. I know YPOers are not shy. So please ask questions and participate in this. And let's just see where this goes, okay? So I'm going to tee this up. And I wrote a bunch of questions. I shared a couple of these with Joe because I thought it'd be fair, but we have a couple tricks in here, and I hope you guys will bring some good material for him as well, because he's a pretty sharp guy. And let's see what happens. So Joe, John already opened the door about the mind, and how and why do you use the mind to approach problems with your clients?
Well, how we define the world is based on a foundational understanding of ourself. A deer is a deer. If you're a gardener, it's a pest. If you drive at night in the countryside, it's a killer. If it's venison, you're a chef or you like venison. It's all based on your own self-definition. And when a business defines itself, it's based on the self-definition that they've brought up through the years and on what the leader thinks it is. How we define any problem determines all the solutions our minds can't think of. How we define a problem and lock it in, what it is and what it isn't, already decides all the solutions we're not going to come up with. Does that make sense? And so when I can hear how the mind is processing, the individual and the collective mind is processing what this problem means and what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, and what we can consider and what we can't consider, I'm able to bring an objective perspective to an understanding of the problem. Does that make sense? It's all meaning, behavior, outcome. And most people, you hire them to change the outcome. I want a different outcome. And I say, tell me how we're defining the problem. Then the behavior will always be in line with your definition. However you define anything or anyone, you'll behave directly to that definition. You can fake it for a little while, but not with any great consistency and not over time. Does that make sense?
Totally. But I've been working with you for a while, so I have a little head start, and it took me a while to understand a lot of your material. So
yeah, it's a bit heady. But what I like about when I committed to this work 30 years ago is if we understand the way the mind naturally works, then we can use the way the mind works when we're communicating a notion to another human being. Our hands work the same. We have different hands, but they work the same. And our minds have a mechanic to it that works the same way. And I'll get into some of what happens when you have a notion and you're trying to communicate it to another mind, and how a leader is basically an influencer. Most of the people in this room don't make the thing that makes you the most money. You don't touch it. You're not near it. You're leading an organization of people who think and behave a certain way. And the more you understand about how to influence their mind individually and collectively as a group, the more you can get them to suspend an idea that they may already have locked in and consider your new notion. And when you do that, you're a leader. You just led a mind to another idea that they might be able to embrace. And that's when organizations jump and grow and move. And I've got several clients in here today that will probably you'll see wanting to jump up and tell their story. But I'll just go as long as you think, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, so I think just play off that influencing people, what are the 3 most important responsibilities of a leader?
Oh. They sound obvious, but they're not as obvious as they seem, because when I go to a business, any of you check out a business, you see the leadership team. It's made up, like yours was, of subject matter experts. You got the head accountant, finance guy, finance lady, got the marketing person, you got the people that are experts at tech in their own subject matter expertise. And when you go to an offsite to reconsider your business, reconsider yourselves, reconsider the marketplace, they bring the subject matter expertise. That's their training. We're all guilty of our training. And maybe they have not been thought to think more strategically, but if you think about Apple Computers wasn't doing that well for a while. It's hard for us to remember those days. Steve Jobs got fired because they were competing against Apple head to head. That's all they want to do, beat Apple, beat Apple, beat Apple. And their identity was, Steve's cool, he's a nerd. Okay, we'll be cool, he'll be nerdy, their company.
Beat Microsoft.
Beat Microsoft, right. And then they said, that's not who we're going to be anymore. Literally an identity shift, a shift in the way I define myself. We're going to pick a technology and totally disrupt it and take it out. Pick one. And they did. They picked music. And they picked a telephone. And they're still picking them today. Textbooks, they're all over textbooks. And when they shifted how they saw themselves, they were able to behave to the new way of thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty basic. You know, how we define ourselves is I just have to repeat that because I haven't heard that in a while because we live that now. But how we define ourselves determines the behaviors we have and then the outcomes. I mean, you can apply all of this personally as we can professionally, right? So that's, you know, I was going to mention that in the opening comments, but all of this stuff, you know, my wife could probably tell you different stories, but you know, the way I've changed as a person is, you know, personally has been as big as the way we've changed our business. So it's been great work.
So I'll answer the 3 things
Yeah.
the leader needs to do. The first one is get the right people. Do you need strategic thinkers? Do you need people who can reconsider themselves and embrace change? Do you need people who know how to influence? Do you need people who know how to collaborate with others at their level? And some of you can already relate to if that's not happening on your team. And the secondly is they're not a team. They're a group of individuals. And you have to make them think like a team. And the way to do that is to own the foundational context by which they see themselves. A context is the general that lends meaning to the specific. Bitch. Some of you are thinking of a jazz musician. Some of them are thinking of a woman with a bad personality. Some of you are thinking about the winner of a dog show. The context owns the meaning of the word. The word didn't change. And a leader's job is to create a foundational context by which those leaders define themselves. At Google, creative. You sit in this room, you're creative. And they start to behave to it. And then you own the foundational context by which all problems are considered, defined, and behaved to. I'll give you an example. I have a president of a company, $750 million company, not in YPO, that is a new president. And she asked me to come in and say, help me with my leadership team. We're going to make drastic changes around here. It's a very stoic company that's in a time of change in its industry. They don't change, they die. She wants to lead the change, which is even harder to do when you're the stoic leader. It's easier for the upstarts. They're not locked into already all these definitions, right? So I said in front of her leadership team, at the end of your tenure, you get hit by that bus or you retire or whatever happens, and someone's writing a review of what happened at this company in your tenure, what did we become that we weren't before? I had to ask her several times, several ways, and she finally said, we're going to be the envy of the industry. If you don't have our products, you want our products. If you don't work here, you want to work here. About 2 weeks later, I'm on the phone with her head of product development. And she says, I've got a problem in one of my divisions. I need to solve it. I've got to get rid of this person. I think I'll just put this person in because I think they can do the job. They really don't know much about that area, but I know I've seen them work as a manager and they'll get it done. I said, you're checking off a box. You're not being a leader. She says, why? I said, how does that move make us the envy of the industry? That foundational context shifted the way she was just going to replace somebody because it was easy. Have we done this? It was the easiest thing to do. To having her think, I've got to write what my vision for that division is. Then I've got to interview people who can tell me how they could create the vision. And then I'm going to hire the one that I think has the best chance of doing it. Totally different approach and will yield a totally different result. And those are the top 3 jobs of a leader.
You want to list those again?
Sure.
Okay.
Get the right people at the highest levels. Not just a subject matter expert sometimes. Your top tech guy probably isn't your best coder. Probably shouldn't be. Coders learn how to live in solitude, not in the streams of life with other people. So they're not as effective sometimes, not always, in their communication style and tolerance of others' inabilities to code. So the right people. Secondly, they've got to become a team, not a group of subject matter experts. They need to think separately and share ideas separately, but with a common goal. The guys on the baseball team have a common goal. They're a team. It's the score. Now, they have a career. They want their batting average good. They want their errors low, or their, whatever other number their position might represent, so their agent can get them a good deal. But it's a team sport. And we do that through foundational context, a common understanding of self. And then they will behave to that meaning. It's always meaning, behavior, outcome.
Thank you. So part of working with Joe is we meet weekly, typically on the telephone, and then quarterly. The reason he's here today is I said, hey, when you're here, for your 2.5 days for our quarterly meet, can we spend a couple hours doing WPO? And he loves YPO Gold. I'm confused, Kim. YPO, I'm going to just go with that because that's what we all. He did, doesn't he? We'll blame him for sure. But anyhow, we have weekly meetings, and so I've had about 120 with Joe so far, and I don't miss them. And I can say all 120 or so have had such an incredible impact. And if anybody else that works with Joe would raise their hand and say the same thing about the impact on their, of course, then you have to divulge it. You're working with this guy. Thank you, Molly and Steve Nelson. The week after week, when you think, it's just going to be another call, how are we going to fill up an hour? It's just amazing. But I mean, you're kind of weird. You're an unusual dude, as these people are figuring out quickly because they're sharp. But how do you do that? I mean, how do you every week give back that value and that powerful impact week after week? Because it's not just these 3. I mean, you're booked day after day, hour after hour. I mean, you are on all the time. How the heck do you do that?
I learned from one of the top psychoanalysts in the world that one of the most important things to do when you're with another human being is to be fully and empathically in the moment with the other. It's not just what they're talking about, it's how they're saying it, it's why they're saying it now, it's how much affect they have about what they're saying. All of those things are information that you can hear them share their information with you. And that will tell you where to take the conversation. I've had conversations where clients would say, and I'll point Molly out because I think you said this a couple weeks ago, I don't know if I should prepare for these calls. And I said, no, talk to me, right? Talk to me. And the call ends up being very fruitful because The way the mind works is, I don't know if it was a commercial or something. You ever see this thing, the mind is a terrible thing to waste? Did you ever hear that? No, it's not true. The mind's just a terrible fucking thing. Excuse the French, but it is, because it's deceptive. Your mind deceives you. My mind deceives me. It doesn't say what it really wants to say because it doesn't even know itself. If I construct it very, very simply, you've got a primitive mind. We've got this primitive mind with an amygdala in the back. And basically, it senses fear. That's to keep you safe from the saber-toothed tiger that might run out from the rock. And as the human beings developed, we developed the right frontal cerebral cortex. It knows language and logic. The problem is these two don't talk to each other very well. They're connected by this neocortex of billions of nerves. It's somewhere in there as a confluence. Now, when you feel fear, you'll feel fear. Your nervous system will go into a sympathetic mode, your palms sweat, you lose your peripheral vision, shortness of breath, faster heartbeat, you get stronger, adrenaline flows. In a parasympathetic mode, your heart beats normal, you breathe normal. This guy goes off and you want to know what you should be afraid of. And sometimes he tells you. Sometimes you make shit up. You literally just you feel fear, you know you should be afraid. You happen to be talking to somebody at the moment and all of a sudden your amygdala goes off and you go, you know what, I don't like her. And nothing she said. You ever have that happen? Anybody? This is the way the mind works. And I have to be able to hear when I talk to a client every week what it is we should be talking about, which is more like a psychotherapist than a business advisor. But when I can hear the mind and I can understand it, we can start to talk about why we think that way. The second thing that kicks in, my answer's too long?
Ask your
Too
audience.
long? Okay, the second thing that kicks in, Freud's third lecture, but I call in the book the greatest desire is to be right. Our greatest desire is not to be loved, or people wouldn't be in abusive relationships and then get out of them and get back in them. Our greatest desire is to be right. We'll fight for that because that harbors your sanity. Even if you're not happy, you're right about it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it even if it hurts. And the mind is made up of a narrative, a self-narrative. Some of it's true. Some of it's complete crap. But you believe all of it to be true, and you will defend it all. And you will behave to it, and you can't change the behavior until you can see another notion in your mind. When you can adapt to a new notion, you could say, oh, we could be this. He was looking for a leadership team that's never started a business or helped a business pivot and asking them to do this. They're nice people. Couldn't do it.
Yeah, because we were the stories we told ourselves. Everybody saw ourselves through the lens of being a temporary staffing business. To make this pivot into an adjacent strategy and use the competencies that we have in a new way, it was just, they were scared.
I didn't know how to get them to realize it without defense. So I went around the table, I said, write down the greatest thing you bring to this company. The number one greatest thing. And you know what they all but one person said?
We care.
We care. That's the greatest skill they're bringing to the table as a strategist to help him pivot. It's important to care, but that's the number one thing I'm bringing to the table today. I said, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But it doesn't solve anything. I had a company that had a parent company, and they were having trouble to determine what the parent company really should be. And so I surveyed all the people that use the services, the shared services. You probably have central offices and shared services and so on. But this is a company with a number of divisions, and I needed to find out, what are we doing because we've always done it? What are we doing because we need to change it? Because it's not valued. It was hard for this leadership team to grasp that. So I said, we're going to go around the room, write down a metaphor for what the parent company is to you. What is the metaphor of the parent company? Now I have their mind. I have their mind. I have an understanding. One guy said a puffer fish. They make me bigger than I am in my purchasing and so on. Another one said translator, because they do business with a country that they need to have all that stuff done and they don't want to deal with that stuff. And then I started to understand, several of them said, good parent. And herein lies the problem. We don't need a parent. Make sense? I don't even know what the hell I was answering. I'm kidding. So I talk to the mind, because the mind will tell me what I need to hear. And I talk to the collective mind of an organization, because they'll tell me what I need to hear. And then my job from there is to analyze and understand, and then have them understand themselves. Here's who you think you are, here's who you say you are, here's the difference in who you really are. And when they can grasp and understand this, and they understand the difference between who they really are and who they need to be to get what they want, not what I want, at their pace, not at my pace, at their comfort level, not at my comfort level, they could see the difference of what they need to change. But if I think I'm here, cameraman just woke up. If they think I'm here, if I think I'm here, and I want to go there, I can walk this way. I know where I'm at, know where you are, right? If you think you're there, but you're over here, you're going to fall. You have to know where you are in a map to find anything. And knowing your mind, collectively and individual in an organization, is knowing where you are. And sometimes you can't get there from here because you're not here. Nelson, can I tell him what I asked you? Nelson called me to work with me. You mind? You want to tell it? Okay. Nelson's a dear friend, and he calls me up. And Nelson's company is third generation. It's a great company. I love working with them. And they're in, what's the name of that city? Spring Lake and Grand Haven. And it's a great family tradition company, and Nelson does a great job leading it. And he called me up and he says, I got a friend says I have to hire you. I said, I like him. He says,
it wasn't me either.
No, it wasn't Mark.
Don't you be blaming me, Nelson.
And he says, why should I hire you? I said, if I could tell you about you in the building you're sitting in, would that be enough? And he said, yeah. So I told him a little bit about himself. And he said, what about the building? I said, it's built like a fortress. It's got a bunch of pictures of dead white guys on the wall. What he learned in that exchange, it's not an insult. What he learned in that exchange is, it's candor. It's candor that I need to understand you, you need to understand you from where you are to move to where you want to be. So let's talk. Does it make sense?
So you're talking about narrative, and can you talk a little bit about the power of storytelling and leading? I mean, we hear there's books written about it now, and I've read some, and they don't seem to really get it. And you've taught me how to do that. I'm learning every day, and I've got a long ways to go. But talk about the power of storytelling and influencing and owning the narrative to be a great leader.
If I asked you to write on a piece of paper the words, who am I? How many people think that's a bit of a tough question? Takes some insight to do that work. But if I told you you can't use your age, your hobbies, your relationships, your job, your salary, is that a trick question? No. All those things can and will change without your permission. And you're still here. Who's here? The question just got harder, and you've been around yourself roughly since birth. You see? So a narrative is a story. We're all the stories we tell ourselves we are. That's who we are. And like I say, some of them are true, some of them are old, haven't been true for 30 years. I've got the Smith luck. We're somewhere in there. And when we can find ourselves today, because we enter each day of life as a novice, never been here before. Cool, I'm smarter than I was yesterday. Cool. Never had this opportunity before. What do I do with it? And I think about that. I don't phone in things by rote, as Mark knows. What do I have that I've not seen before that I can work with that might be different? So we're the stories we tell ourselves we are, because every word we have in our mind as a definition, dear, is about us. I explained that one earlier, right? Every notion or idea, which is a string of a glossary of terms together, makes up a story. The mind will defend that story to the death, rather than accept a new notion. So you're a leader. You're supposed to influence somebody else to let go of their notion and grab onto yours, and they've never done it before. How do you get them to do that? Through authority? Through salary or pay or docking their pay? How do you get a mind to let go of what it knows to be true, to accept a possible other notion that might disregard this, and all of a sudden you've pivoted a business and you're creating more money than you had in your other business with very similar people, if not some the same?
So, who has a question? There's people taking notes. You're all leaders. What doesn't sound right? What do you want other thoughts on leadership? I can keep going. I have a number of questions, but that's not the idea. So help me out. Who has a... Kim, thank you.
Joe, I've always believed that perspective is everything. And whether you come into this room and see that wall, or you come into this room and see that wall, perspective is totally different. Is that an oversimplification of what you're saying, or is that a part of what you're saying?
That's a very much part of what I'm saying. You can only see it from your perspective. To get someone to understand or see it from their perspective, they have to deny what they're seeing for a minute. They have to absolutely deny it, or what I call hold it in suspension. There's a guy named William Taylor Coleridge. He died in 1834. Lived about 60 years. Did a lot of absinthe. And absinthe had woodworm in it, so he saw a lot of things that didn't really exist. But he was a poet, but he was also a surrealist writer. And he was trying to analyze, how can you write a story about a pig talking to a flying cow and have the reader not go, that's ridiculous. How does that happen? How do you go to a James Bond movie and walk out and going, he's still cool? Like, you don't walk out and go, no one could do that. And he coined this term that you've probably heard called the willing suspension of disbelief. You willingly suspend your disbelief when you open the book or you walk into the movie theater. Would you agree? And you let the director tell you a story, and as long as there's a human enough connection in there for you to relate to, you're fine. Your mind can consider the story as metaphor or allegory, and it'll make sense to you. So in thinking about getting a mind to suspend what it knows, what it perceives, its perception, in thinking about that, I coined the term for my new book, the willful suspension of the known. If our greatest desire is to be right, how do you get someone to willfully suspend that which they know to be true, so that you have a chance to get them to at least listen to your idea? And I'll go to Shakespeare. There was has anybody studied history or Roman history or Caesar? John. Okay, so John knows. And there are Roman historians that actually recorded what happened to Caesar in the Forum. Shakespeare was a historian. He researched that. If you line up word for word the historian's account and Caesar's version of the more romantic version of the Julius Caesar assassination, it's right in line. We know he was stabbed 23 times. We're pretty sure Brutus was last. Brutus didn't want to stab his friend. But the senator stood there and looked at him. And he had two choices. Die, stab Caesar. We're all in this together. Et tu, Brute. Mark Antony wasn't there. Mark Antony was one of Caesar's generals, Caius and Mark Antony. Mark Antony comes into the form. Mark Antony loved Caesar. He looks at, his army has to stay outside the walls, a Roman rule. He looks at Caesar's bloody body. He looks at the senators holding their knives, and they pretty much give him the same deal that they gave Brutus. He says, I understand. I understand you did what you have to do. I'll only ask for one thing. Let me address the Romans. Let me present Caesar's body to the Romans. He loved these people. And they all agreed, okay, it sounds risky, but he's just a general. We got Brutus here. Brutus is an orator. More of a legal orator. He'll state his case. He doesn't really appeal to the allegorical mind. But they didn't know that at the time. They hadn't studied Aristotle. So they present the body, and I almost got arrested in the Roman Forum last year because I was showing my best friend where they presented the body, and I happen to know a lot about Roman history. And the police were, what do they call it? The trade police. You know, they thought I was poaching, right? Because I'm pointing to everything, and they come over and they want my papers, and they separate us, and I'm like, but that's what they thought I was doing because I knew where things were. So that made my buddy feel happy. So they want Brutus to go first because they want him to win the day. And once the audience, the Romans, know why we killed Caesar, it's going to be harder for him to convince them they're wrong. They were smart enough to know that. Mark Antony just sits back. Brutus said, he made his case. Would you rather make him your emperor and all die slaves? Or would you rather be freedmen of Rome? We did this for Rome. I'm paraphrasing. He wins the day. Everyone's going, well, seems to make sense. Shakespeare gave Mark Antony 7 words that allowed him to have the audience willfully suspend the known that they just heard from Brutus. 7 words. He says, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. That's all he said. Now let's analyze that. If you're a boss, you're the lead person in your organization, that audience identifies itself a little bit differently than we segment them out. There are directors and executives and employees and hourly and salary. And he basically said, hey, friends. No, he didn't say friends. He said friends, if we are. Romans, if you prefer. And countrymen, if you prefer. But we're all countrymen. And they're in. And their amygdala stands down. They're okay so far. He didn't say, shut up and listen. He said, he's lying to you. That would have been an immediate attack. Defense would have kicked in on their minds. He didn't say, you got to hear this. He didn't say, give me your mind. Lend. Lend? Amygdala's okay. I can lend. Lend me your what? Just your ear. Just your ear. He's got them willfully suspending what they know now to consider what he says. And he says, these are all honorable men. And they did what they thought they had to do for Rome. What you don't know is I have Caesar's will. I have what Caesar was going to give you when he died. And he goes on, and these are honorable men. By the time he's done, they're rioting. They want the senators killed. Caius goes, gets his army. Mark Antony goes, gets his army. They fight for a while, and in the end, Caius falls on his sword. That's where that saying comes from. So as a leader, if we want to get an idea that isn't probably, it could be new in some way, we have to get them to willfully suspend the known idea that is their idea, which they will defend, because that's how the mind works. Does that make sense? So that's something that's new in the new book.
Yeah, can you talk about that? He's writing a book with McKeel Haggerty called The Undeniable Leader. So can you tell us how that happened and maybe why?
I was drunk.
Yeah.
He took advantage of me.
We've been there. We can sympathize
Yeah,
with
it's
you.
fair. McKeel's father passed away a couple of years ago now, and I happened to be in town working with his team. Everyone was giving his space, and next thing you know, my text goes off, and it's he and his wife Soon are in the local restaurant that they like to go to. And they're just reflecting, and they said, "Why are we here alone?" And all of a sudden, they started texting all these people. And it's an instant party, an Irish wake. And I walk in, and McKeel turns around, and I said, "I'm sorry, man." And he gives me the biggest hug he's ever given me and says, "We're going to write a book together that's going to change the world." And I already know the title. It's going to be called Undeniable Leader. I said, "Okay, I'm in." And that's how that came about. And what I want to do in the book is bring ideas from the power of losing control, expand upon them, and simplify them, because it's important to simplify an idea. It's like the handle on a mattress. If it's a big idea, you got to have a way to pick it up. And then introduce these new concepts. That your job as a leader is to influence a mind, to have it think differently than it normally thinks. If you really want to transform a business. And by the way, if you want to change a kid's mind, if you want to appeal to your spouse, context is critical. My wife came into my dressing room the other day. I've got a nice dressing room with my iPad sitting there, and I was just checking the calendar as I'm getting ready to pack. And she goes, "Well, being that you're going to the accountant's tomorrow," now I live on an island at the top of Lake Erie. The accountant's in Troy, Michigan. And it's a bit of a haul. She doesn't like to drive it. So she figures I'm going to see Gary, my accountant, in Troy, Michigan, the next day. She says, "Why don't I go with you and we'll go to the mall?" She wants to go to Somerset Mall. It's a nice mall in the area. Now I got a problem. I'm not going to Troy tomorrow. Gary is not on my calendar for tomorrow. What do? Take her entire context and shoot it right out of the air? I said, "Really, I'm not aware that I'm going to see Gary tomorrow." And I popped my computer up so she could see the screen. I said, I don't have it here. And she starts pulling her phone out. No, you're going tomorrow. I know you're going. And it's not on her screen. And I said, "Well, honey, let's look." I put the month up. I think I'm seeing him after Rome. So let's look at a Tuesday after Rome. And sure enough, the first Tuesday after Rome, Gary. She said, "Well, somebody changed it. Something's wrong." Desire to be right. I want her off of that, and I want her to calm down. And I started to address the real reason she came into the room. "Take me to the mall tomorrow." And I said, "Now let me look at tomorrow afternoon and see if I'm open. We can leave here by 3. Let's have dinner up there. We'll go to Capitol Grill." She goes, "Okay." Walks out just fine. So we have to understand the way the mind works, even in relationships, in contexts, in the desire to be right, in order to introduce another notion. And sometimes you got to put your own defense away to do that. One time, I had a guy, he's a YPO or not in Michigan, although this has now happened 3 times in Michigan, so you'll probably think you know who it is. And he said, "I'm the CEO, and I think I need a president." And he's having all kinds of trouble because he's a real smart guy, like many YPOers are. And he says, "Why should I?" He said, after this has been going on for months. Well, the YPO buddies his foreign buddies are starting to say, "You know what? You could do that. There's a lot of CEO and presidents." So he calls me up. I'm a peripatetic. When I'm on the phone, I have an earpiece in and I pace. If it's the summertime, I'm outside in the grounds. If it's wintertime, I'm going nuts in the house. And I'm standing next to the baby grand piano, and I stop. He says. So the guy said I could be president. You know, I'm pretty sure I could do it. Now listen to the sequence of my response. Because now we've got ego wrapped up in this besides, right? And I said, absolutely you could do it. First thing I did not attack the idea, gave it permission. Does that make sense? Absolutely could do it. I just have one question. If we can answer this question, we'll know if it's a good idea. He goes, shoot. I said, well, if you submitted your resume today to be president of your company, would you hire you? I got a very warm FU back through the phone. Because we have the kind of relationship where he was saying, damn it. Okay, got it. Now I got to do all this work and find a president. Does that make sense? When you hear a mind, how you respond to it determines whether it'll consider your notion. I knew I could be direct with this guy. But I had to take him to 35,000 feet. Yes, you could do it. You could do it. And he'd want to say, well, what is it I can't do? Well, what is it I can do? We're still talking about him being president. I took him out of the notion, made him the interviewer, and made him the candidate. And his mind went to that level of perspective, and he was able to see, not a good idea.
So what, 5 steps of wisdom?
Okay. How we doing, all right? Are you having fun? Am I telling too many stories? Not enough stories? Notice how stories, if I just got up and said facts, this would be boring. It probably is boring right now, but when you tell stories, it's how we understand things. The mind works in story. It's so you make a point, you tell a story, you make a point. You make a point, you tell a metaphor, you make a point. As a leader, always have that story. The right stories. We were talking about artificial intelligence earlier and the importance of artificial intelligence. And I just read a book on a guy who's a psychoanalyst who's studying artificial intelligence. He says, well, the first thing we have to ask is, what is intelligence? And he starts breaking it apart. He says, I can get a robot waitress, to bring you a menu, have you pick the food, select the food, bring back the food on the table the way you wanted it, and throw it on the table, and thinks they did the right job, when in fact you're offended. He says there's nuance in story. There's subtlety in story. It's how the mind understands something. And I've defined, and I'll talk about in my new book, brilliance lies in having the right story at the right moment, at the right time for the right person. Because then you can help them understand themselves at a higher level and maybe let go of something that's not serving them in the moment. And I do it all day long. Would you agree with that? All day long, because that's my job. So I've had a lot of practice at it. But as leaders, practice the story. Have a reason why, the why behind the what. And their minds will start to hear you. Meaning is about connection. Anytime you make connection, you can find meaning. If you don't care about wine, it's red, it's white, you don't care. There's no connection to anything. And the more you care about it, the more it has meaning. And the more meaning it has, the more you can attach to the idea. The more meaningful it is to you. Right? Neurologically, biologically, physiologically, emotionally, and socially. We need meaning. We need connection. All of us need connection to find meaning. If your nerves don't connect with each other, you have a form of dementia in your mind. They have to connect to find meaning. And with people, we have to connect to find meaning. People you don't care about, you don't know anything about, you don't care that you don't know. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So a story is just a tool that we use to help the mind make a connection. You want to do a quick exercise? 15 seconds. Really tough. Really difficult. You ready? We'll do this together. How we need meaning to make connection, or we need connection, I'm sorry, to find meaning. We use a story to do it. Scrambled eggs, ham, and bacon walk into a bar. They ask the bartender for a drink. He refuses to serve them. When they say, why? He said, it's simple, we don't serve breakfast here. Now, a bad joke at best. But I said, this is going to be tough. 15 seconds, you went, you're not losing me. Or you went, oh boy, I don't know if I can do this. Depending on the story, you tell yourself, you are. Right? And then I said, what did I say, ham? Scrambled egg, ham and bacon or something. A healthy breakfast. And I said, scrambled egg, and you went like, you immediately, breakfast, I'm okay. And I said, walks, and you went, blit. And then I said, into a bar, and then you went, okay, into walks into, oh, anything that walks into a bar is a setup for a cliched joke. I'm okay. Then I hurried through the rest of the joke, or we would have lost connection. And then the punchline wasn't really a funny punchline. It's a cliche that ties whose word, your word or my word, your word, breakfast, to the end of the joke. We need to make connection to find meaning. Stories help us make connections. They're the device that help us make the connection. And we don't use them enough as leaders. Facts and figures, that should be enough. We need the story.
Who was that? I know Jim was at West Michigan Policy, and Biss, you came for lunch. Anybody else at the West Michigan Policy Conference yesterday? Gary, I think I saw you. Yeah, so did anybody hear what Mark Zuckerberg studied in the short time he was at Harvard other than computer science? Did anybody pick that up? Behavioral psychology. So that, obviously Mark Zuckerberg got it on many fronts, but at the very short time, he understood that when he was going to go create this incredible business, the psychology part was going to be as important as the computer science.
It's what drove the whole business.
Yeah.
Think about this, and that's a great point. If your greatest desire is to be right, and I like what you say,
Yeah, thumbs up.
how's that feel? I just tweaked your greatest desire. And he tapped it. And he knew where it was going to go. That's the psychology of Facebook. He just used a computer to make it happen that way, where anybody can tell you you're a damn genius. Or they like... It took off when the like was added. Until that like was added, it was It was a way to find girls and rate them on campus, basically. That drove, what's the value prop on Google, on Facebook now? That, because he studied behavior psychology. That's a nice bridge. What?
And a female chief operating officer as well.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Yep.
Yep, good point. Kim, thank you. Anybody else have a burning desire to ask a question? Come on, guys. Thank you, Steve.
To give a context, one of the things a skill that astounds me, and maybe I need it more than anybody else, but I will tell him about what happened in a meeting, what so-and-so said, and so-and-so said, like 3 or 4 people, and I'll describe what was said and maybe what I said, and he will almost like he was sitting in the room and better understanding what was going on in the meeting than I was when I was sitting there. Can you describe how that happened? Why I'm such an idiot, I guess.
Yeah, I know, right?
Now, you know what?
You're not alone, Steve. I have that same feeling.
For the video, if you paraphrase his question, because I don't know if the mic was able to pick him up.
Yeah. So Steve was saying that he sits on a phone call. He'll kind of dissect a meeting from the day before, and he'll repeat what happened around the room, including what he said. And Joe gets it like that, and it's like he was sitting in the room, and he makes you feel a little ignorant. That's my paraphrase, but was that fairly accurate paraphrase? How do you do it?
How do it? No. There's a couple things that happen. Number one is I'm not biased by your perspective in the room. I had no dog in the fight in the moment. I'm hearing the story. That's first. Secondly, you'll hear me ask some questions, clarifying questions. when someone presents to me, the first thing I do is I go into question mode. Would you agree? I mean, I want to know this. Did they say that? Was that their word or is that your word? And I go into that kind of an analytical detective mode. Thirdly, I break down the character of the animal and how they think. I can predict behavior. It's easy to predict behavior if you just pay attention to someone, because they're going to do what they do. They're going to be who they are. And if you just understand that part, you can predict whether they're going to go there or there next. Or why they would say this when it's absolutely not in their best interest in the meeting. You're getting played. He really wants this. Tell me about this. And he'll tell me about that, and I can go, okay. Red herring. It's so by just understanding people, you'd be amazed if you could just drop ego, sense of self, subjugate own personal narrative, and be fully and empathically in the moment with the other. What you can see. Because I'm not seeing the world through my definition. I'm trying to see it through theirs, empathically in the moment. See what they see, hear what they hear, feel what they feel, know what they know. Does it make sense? Is that helpful? It's still esoteric. I mean, you're not going to be able to walk out of here and do this, sorry. But that's my expertise.
I've been studying with for 2.5 years, and I'm still trying to get it, Steve. So
Two and a half years is more than 127
I guess
phone
it wasn't.
calls.
Well, we didn't. I met you 2.5 years. We started working 120 phone calls ago.
Okay.
So, you had an unusual pivot. Speaking of pivots, some of you know this, but at 18, Joe went off to college. He had scholarships. The world was in front of him, and he came home not feeling well, and he was diagnosed with incurable cancer. And can you just talk a little bit about, from that, you're still alive, so.
Oh, you told him the ending.
Yeah, I'm ruining the story, but can you talk about how you got there from that pivot in your life at 18 years old to where you're at today and how you help so many of us?
Yeah, I could do an Iron Cross on the rings in gymnastics. I was very strong. The 4 scholarships. I had the world by the ass, as my dad would say. And I couldn't wait to get out of college and go be somebody. And I sat in a hospital room at U of M. I think it was 2 weeks before my birthday. And 7 doctors came in the room and said, no, 6 doctors looked at their shoelaces. The lead oncologist looked at my mother and said, if I knew this was part of my job, I would never have chosen this profession because I can never do this right. I apologize in advance. We have things to talk about. Turns, looks at me and says, Joe, you have cancer. You're going to die. There's nothing we can do. I'm sorry. It's not curable. I went from this narrative to that narrative. I didn't know what to do. I started what I call a congruency weave. I bobbed. Nothing made sense. I was getting a little bit psychically dizzy. And he went on, he says, there's a radical chemotherapy surgery protocol. We are not going to cure you. In fact, we're probably going to kill you because it's radical, it's nationwide, and we'll choose the highest dosage we think your body can handle. And if when we determine that dosage, we're going to give it to you one night. If you decide to voluntarily sign your way into the program. So you can't sue us. Your parents can't sue us. If you live through the first night, we'll do it 5 more nights. 3 weeks have to go by before you can handle anything else. You never handle that dosage again. It's got a half-life of 200 years. We'll do this 4 months. When you're done, we're going to cut you from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, and here, because you're full of tumors. You have a 4-inch tumor in your stomach, 2 in your right lung, 2 in your left lung, and 1 in your lymph node. It may be in your brain. He says, if you live, it would be for about 6 months on a lung machine. And that's it. But you might help us get closer to curing metastasized testicular cancer. And I decided to go into the program. I'll just tell the short version. And I started to talk to my parents about death, dying. Now, I have to go in for this base testing because they have to guess, what can I handle? Lungs, heart, liver, kidneys, hearing. What can I handle of this toxic chemical mix that they're going to give me? And so I was talking to my mom about planning my funeral, and there was a blonde young oncology nurse named Jeannie McDonough who came in after my chest x-ray. I was putting my shirt on. And Jeannie was young and bubbly and cool and cute, and she didn't use words like carcinoma. So we kind of could relate, we could connect to Jeannie. And she comes in and she says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Cool, Jeannie." She goes, "In the other room." We go in the other room, and she looks up at me, which not too many people over 12 can do. And she says, "What the hell are you doing?" I have no idea what she's talking about, but being a good Catholic, I feel guilt immediately. She says, "Talking to your mother about your funeral. Who told you you were going to die?" I said, you did." She says, "Never mind that. What did we say?" Now, I have no idea what we're talking about. So my dad had written, he'd asked one of the docs, how many men, it's a young man's disease, will live past the 4 months of chemo to the surgeries? The doc said, "We anticipate 3%. So my dad had written 3% on a yellow 8x by 11, he was an engineer, 3%, and put it with a refrigerator magnet on the refrigerator. So because I don't know what she's talking about, I default to my dad, who I think is a really smart guy, and I said, "You said I had a 3% chance of living through the chemo." And she says, "No, we didn't. That would be medically irresponsible." Now I have no idea what's going on. And I said, "Well, Jeannie," I'm going to stand here because that's a pain for you to keep going like that. I'm sorry. I said, "Jeannie, my dad wrote it down. He's a really smart guy. I heard it too. It's on our refrigerator." She said, "Let me ask this differently. If God whispered in your ear and said, 'You will be among the 3% that lives through the surgeries,' what would your chances be of living through?" I said, "Well, 100%. She just gave a stat lesson to a dying 18-year-old. She said, let me ask you another question." She's all of a sudden Socratic on me. I said, "Okay." She says, "Why did you decide to go into the program? They told you you're going to wish you were dead and then you're going to die, and I'm telling you it's that bad." And I said, "Because someday you're going to find a cure, and the only way you can find it is if guys like me enter the program. It's a rare cancer. If I don't go into the program, I'm putting off the cure, and I'm going to die anyway. I don't think I have the right." She said, "I see. So you believe someday someone will be the first person cured of metastasized testicular cancer?" It never occurred to me, one lucky sucker. I was thinking polio, eradication of a disease. But logically, she's appealing to my mind, and it makes sense to eradicate a disease. Somebody's going to be the first person cured, right? I said, "Oh, well, I guess I do then." She said, "I see you've decided it can't be you." Now, that's like throwing a life raft out to a drowning man. And I grabbed it with both hands. I said, "Are you telling me I can live?" She said, "That would be medically irresponsible." She says, "What I'm telling you is, if you've decided the first person's not going to be you, there's not a damn thing we can do to help you." And she stormed out, and she let me stand in this room with the same problem I had when I walked in, incurable testicular cancer. Only Jeannie shifted my context. Remember, bitch, what's it mean? Dear, what's it mean? Incurable testicular cancer, what's it mean? It doesn't have to mean plan your funeral. It could mean for as long as the rest of your life is, what is life? Why don't you study life? It's positive. And I committed how I would do it would be to study 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, the greatest minds that have ever lived. So the result of what you're hearing didn't come because last month I decided to go watch a TED Talk. It's a pivotal moment in what something means. And when the meaning shifts, my behavior shifted. The outcome I couldn't predict. No one could. But I'm now standing in front of you today, and I stood in front of 10,000 oncology nurses in Vegas as the first person cured of metastasized testicular cancer. Partially because Jeannie understood how to talk to another mind that already had a notion locked in, and how to shift the context so they can willfully hold that known, like mashed potatoes that are too hot. What do you do with them? You don't swallow them. You just suspend them somehow, magically. That's what she did with my mind, with a known notion. And as leaders, if we're going to influence others, that's what we have to get really good at. The better we get at it, the more effective we are as leaders. And that's what I want to teach the whole world. Until I, this time for real, go. So that's why I've been so excited to be here today.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
You mentioned Apple earlier. Now, that's a real interesting case of leadership. And here's a guy that really didn't care if he connected or not with his team. So he didn't really build it in a lot of ways in a traditional sense. But he obviously built a phenomenal team and huge value. Talk a little bit about the characteristics of Steve Jobs and the characteristics of his key top leaders to make that thing work. Because it was a special recipe that maybe was so unique it can't be repeated. I don't know. What do you think?
He was the Michael Jordan of computers, you know. Okay, we're talking about the characteristics of Steve Jobs and the characteristics of his leaders, the dynamic and how that worked, when in fact, anybody that knows somebody that worked for Steve Jobs knows in their most honest moment, they're not going to be effusive about what a sweetheart he was always to work with. I had to do a course. I'll tell a story to answer the question. Shocker. I was brought in to speak to a local community who was they were putting leaders through a 10-week leadership course where they learn about the community, they learn about leadership, they learn about the business. You do some of that here in West Michigan. And they wanted me to speak about leadership. So I need to know where the audience's perspective is before I start. Right? So I said, what is the single number one determination of a leader? And I got character and quality and good heart and a listener, and I've got all these nice words that we've heard in all these leadership books since since the alpha leader was pushed out and the younger leaders came in the early 80s. And one guy raised his hand. He was the head of the hospital at the time, and he says, I just got back from a course on leadership. I'm thinking, you're in a damn course on leadership, but go ahead. And he says, leadership are like the 5 points of the star. And I'm going, oh God. Now the star has 5 points, and each point's going to stand for a word. And the words were all the same words: integrity and intelligence and courage and listening and these things. And I said, I'm asking for the one thing that determines a leader. And I wrote on the flip chart, leadership is determined by the willingness of others to follow. If there's nobody behind you, do the math, you ain't leading shit. It's the willingness of others to follow. To follow what? Initially, your notion, your idea of identity, of who you can be, who we can create, who we can be. Steve Jobs was a genius at that. That's the first part of the answer. There's a line in one of the movies that they did on Steve Jobs. I didn't see the movie, but there's a line in the movie where his number 2 guy gets very pissed off at him. I mean, really upset. I mean, letting him have it, which you didn't do too often with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs knew he needed this guy, because this guy codes and does all kinds of things. Steve didn't write code. So he says, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do this, you're not capable of that, you don't even do this. What is it you do? And Steve Jobs says, I play the orchestra. He had that understanding that he could iconically represent what? He can iconically represent the smart rebel, and he dressed the part, and he never changed that outfit. He's the smart rebel. He's the cool rebel. We're taking out an industry. We're not just making a cool little gadget. We're defying the man by taking out the industry. And he represented that, and they believed they could do it because he told them they could. And he had an idea of how. That's a great leader. Likable guy? I'll let everybody decide. I can't say anything bad about the man. I had no experience with him personally. I just tell you, I know people that worked for him, and they wouldn't put likable guy above great leader. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Well, fear. Well, let me ask it this way. I'm going to ask a question of the young lady behind you. What's your name? Jordan? Jory. I'm sorry. Okay. You look like you have a lot of friends. You just look like you smile readily, and you emote, you give people good positive energy. Okay, so I want to ask you a question, and they're going to eavesdrop, don't worry, because the minute I ask you the question, they're going to be thinking of their answer to your question. And they're going to care more about their answer than yours, because me. Okay. You work? College friends? College friends? High school friends? Neighborhood friends? Facebook friends? LinkedIn friends? Not so many. Okay. So, out of all these people that like you, how do you spell your name? I-E, Jory. It's a pretty name. Out of all these people that like Jory, give me a number. Is it 200, 500, 1,000, 3,000? And you're going to be modest, but give us a number. How many of these people are there that like Jory? $300. Okay, do y'all have your number? I asked the International YPO chair one time this question. She said 5,000. His wife said 5,000. Like this. Not the current chair. Soon's got like 10,000. Now, the second question is much more difficult. And I'm not saying that we're phonies, and I'm not saying that we're two-faced. I'm saying that we're complex beings. We have fear fantasies, all kinds of things going on in our mind that we don't share with everyone. Or we even can't because we don't even know our own minds sometimes. How many people really, I mean really, know Jory? Really know you? You know you? Tough question. 37.
Wow, that was some computing power there.
Jory, I've been doing this for a long time. You're the only 37 ever. I want to meet you after.
Yeah.
All right, so here's my question. You guys all have your number. How many people really, really know you? I mean, really know you? And here's how we'll it's fair if we find out what their number is, but we'll do it a fast way. How many people, raise your hand, if that number is 5 or less? Raise your hand. The vast majority of people will say 5 or less people really know me. She's got 37. I got 300 people that like her. Here's my problem. She looks sweet enough, but the bitch just lied to me. I got 300 people. 300 people that like her, and I only got 37. It very well could be, because I didn't establish context. That's called defense. Okay, I didn't establish a context. But here's what I'm saying. You're really not a bitch. I'm trying to make everybody laugh, okay? Here's the bottom line. they do like Jory. Hell, I like Jory. I've never met her before. You get 37 people that she says know her, that really like her, but you got these other people that don't know her, and she says they like her. Can I make a suggestion? The reason for the relationship, what they really, really like, is themselves when they're with Jory. And that's the key to the friendship. Would you agree with that? Quit trying to get people to like you. It's not the basis of the relationship. Get them to like themselves when they're with you. Get them to like themselves when they're working for your company. More of an answer to your question again. Get themselves to like themselves because I work for him and he talks to me. Get themselves to like the idea that we're going to change the world. You know what the number one fear in life is? Number one fear, death. Number two fear, a cousin of death, irrelevance. If our CEO comes by and stops and says, what are you having for lunch today? That looks good. Never talked to this person in life, never saw them in their life. They're telling that story at dinner. Because you made them relevant. And you're important. Make sense? Boy, I'm on a rant here.
That was good. I love that. The whole notion of the idea of people liking themselves when they're with you. It's a great thought. John?
Yeah, actually, you sort of answered one question, but, really had two. One, why do people struggle with the concept continuous learning? That's one. The second one, especially after just coming back from Rome, Joni and I had a testing there, but what have you learned most from the Roman Empire that you apply today?
Now you opened a whole can of worms, John. We're going to be here way through cocktail hour, and I'm about ready for one.
I can go to volume 3 of Caesar and Christ, World of the Civilization.
No, it's a
but
great question.
Probably shouldn't go there.
It's a great question, though.
Okay, question number 1. The reason that lifelong learning challenges us is because we get locked more and more into what we know as we age. And so lifelong learning really becomes lifelong edification. I will listen to those ideas that I think are like me and validate me. And the challenge of lifelong learning, if you're truly a lifelong learner, is you have to have the courage to question that which you know. My clients are courageous. I pick my clients. If they're not courageous, I can't help them. I'll struggle. They have to have the courage. And we have to have a conversation that's safe in a relationship, right? When we have conversations. Nelson, we have to have a conversation that's safe. Roman Empire. I started studying the Roman Empire when I was 18 years old. I was interested in the fall of the Roman Empire. I was interested in how it goes away. How do you have so much and it goes away? It was the same thing when I studied the Great Depression. How did it just go away? I didn't want to know macroeconomically, microeconomically. I wanted to know psychologically what happened that made it go away. The Romans ended up doing something that has been repeated over and over, unfortunately, and nobody beat them. I mean, they lost a war here and there, but nobody beat the Roman civilization. We talk about Gibbons and the fall of Rome. There isn't a cutoff line. So what happened? A couple things happened. Number one, they were shown to be weak. That's happening with our enemies in the world today. I don't care what your politics are. None of them can beat us. They could just show us to be weak. Death by 1,000 cuts. And some of them are being effective. Number two, Romans, after they crossed the Rubicon, had to start to defend everything that they fought for. They were very effective at it in setting up local jurisdictions and so on, laws, taxes. We still use many of their rules today and ideas. but they're having to fight on too many fronts. And the education of the Romans went into the toilet. Language became a problem. Latin wasn't spoken. They would adopt some of the ways of the people they would conquer because that's assimilation, and it worked for them for a long time. But there was no Rome. There was no unifying foundational context of who we are. And without that, it's like a common language. It's a common understanding of who we are. And without there, you get infighting, and you have all kinds of challenges. And it doesn't take a strong, in fact, there's a theory that a woman opened up the gates of Rome from the inside when they sacked it. That's my opinion. You're welcome to it. Yeah.
Are you describing Rome or the United States of America?
I started to postulate when I was 25 years old that we are going to go the same way, only more quickly. And I don't see any. I can find dissimilarities in specifics. I cannot find dissimilarities in the general, and including the lack of understanding of history, including that. Now, I'm not trying to be down about this in any way, shape, or form. But remember, you are here. If you don't know where you are, you can't get to where you want to be. And we can go around, greatest country in the world. Yes, but if you tell Syria there's a red line and you don't do anything, you're weak. If you tell China stay out of the South Sea and they do it anyway, the rest of the world's watching. And we're doing this over and over and over and over and over all over the world. And some people are saying, well, it's for diplomacy. That way people don't die. Maybe it is. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. I'm not involved on that level of politics. But I do know the similarities of being stretched too thin, fighting on too many battles, no overarching foundational context, no political person running for politics, not one of them, has an interest of uniting any of us. The fastest way to create a common hatred is through a common enemy, Bertrand Russell. And so you're here or you're here. You're with me or you're against me. And they create the divisiveness. Now the problem is, then there's an election. Okay? One chump won. They don't unite. They continue the divisiveness. So we're a constant state of election. We're a constant state of dividing the minds of the American people. There is no overarching foundational context. Here's something to think about. I don't think I've ever shared this. I'm at the Waldorf Astoria attending the psychoanalytic conference. My friend's 84 years old. He has to go up to his room to study. He needs a nap. So I don't know how long I'm going to be waiting for him, but I'm going to wait for him. I go up to my room. There's a TV on. I do something I never do. I turn the TV on. There is a special on Boris Spassky and who's the American? Chess player. Iceland.
Oh, Bobby Fischer.
Bobby Fischer. The special is about Bobby Fischer, who's a little nuts. And he had issues. And, a lot of these guys do actually have certain conditions, and Bobby was clearly one of them. So there's specials on this and how we used chess in the Cold War to help win the Cold War. Chess, a game nobody cared about. We all had chessboards in the house, but they were kind of dusty. And they go where? Reykjavik, Iceland, a place nobody's been. And Bobby Fischer's talking that the room is bugged and the chair's not right and the table's not right, and Boris Spassky's going crazy because he just wants to play this guy in chess. And it becomes a news story. Why? It's a drama now. Remember, if you enter the human element, we can relate to it. Willing suspension of the no. We don't have to care about chess. We now care about the American and the Russian. Who's smarter, America or Russia? Based on these two guys playing a chessboard game? Well, that's the narrative. And we bought it. So they cut away to the news, black and white news show. And the anchor says, we have so-and-so out in Boise, Idaho, or some place in the Midwest, interviewing people about who's going to win, Spassky or... And so they go out there, and it's a typical Midwestern 50s family. The dad's got the short-sleeved collared white shirt on, and the mom's got the kind of cotton house coat on, and Graham is there with the nylons down, and the little boy's dressed like Dennis the Menace. I swear to God, the striped shirt, you know. It is 50s in America and Midwest. It looks like 50s. It's actually, this happened far after that, but it was definitely a throwback family. And the announcer, who they all used to talk like this, didn't go up to anybody at the table except for the little kid. He's 7. He goes up to the little kid, he says, "And young man, are you aware of the chess game?" "Yeah." "Who's going to win?" "Oh, the American's going to win." Really? "Absolutely." "How do you know that?" He says, "Well, because if the American wins, he gets to keep all his money, and if the Russian wins, they take it." That's a foundational context. That's a united foundational context. It's a simple one. It's not a complex one, but it's an understanding of self. Today, we don't know what a socialist is, let alone a communist. I'm not saying you. I'm saying I'm seeing a lot of people that don't know what it means. So this understanding of self is critical, and the politicians have no desire to help you have one that helps you. They are self-interested people, and their desire is that you adopt one that helps them, which is you're for them and against them. And that's why I can say, yeah, kind of describing both.
Okay, one more question. Mark?
Joe, you did a nice job, I think, talking about leaders as storytellers, providing inspiration. How there have been great leaders who have missed the pivot point or they're bending the road with disruption. What insight do you have about looking ahead in this age of technology change that would help us?
Good question. Can you repeat that for the video folks?
Well, I
And
can't
thank you.
say it with as much grace as Mr. Bissell, but basically, what is the advice to look down the road and see the bend in the road, and with all the change in technology and keeping up? Disruption, thank you.
Disruption, people that might miss their pivot point, yeah. We have to first learn the difference between a trend and a fad. Much of what we're seeing are fads. They're not trends. They're fads. They come, people embrace them, they go away, they go away. Pet rocks, chia pets, fads. Technology, not a fad, not going away. Aspects of it will not apply. Artificial intelligence is going to be huge. If you have dumb technology, it's probably not going to make it. Information is critical. The problem with right now with this fascination with big data is you give somebody that much information and they don't know how to filter it properly, you can come up to real, certain, wrong conclusions. Does it make sense? So we've got to be able to be sharp about analysis, what things mean, what is a trend and not a fad. We have to watch for things like security. It's gone. Somebody probably has stolen your ID. Just haven't done anything with it yet. It's just the odds are. And the governments are going to be using it. So the confidence that we have in technology will also fade a little bit. We'll use it, but we use it very carefully for different reasons. Right now it's, you get a form and they say, well, do you want to get this, this, and this? Agree or disagree to our legal, do you ever read one of those legal pages, or did you just hit agree? You hit agree every time. And there's people that are smart enough to understand this is how we can get information. And the more I know about you, the more I can affect your mind. And so that's going to be a trend. If we don't know enough about our customers, if we're still more in love with our product and services than our customers are, we're living in a different age. We have to know more about them and know what they want. Now, that doesn't mean you give them what they want. What they want is everything for free. I'm a capitalist. I love to charge, but I love the value that I can provide to charge against it. It's part of my identity. Does that make sense? So I think what we do is you find people that aren't into fads, but more that can make the determination to trends, because they can sell you on their passion. I know a company right now, and the head technologist thinks he's Steve Jobs. And like I said, Steve Jobs was he's a freak show. He's unusual. I got companies that think they're going to become Google. Google was a freak show. It's not a good model. Your odds are very slim. Why don't you just tell your kid, grow up to be a rock star? What are the odds? So I think we have to stay open-minded in considering these things, and I think we look for things that aren't going to go away and things that will be fads. And I wouldn't put my money on a fad. I know everybody wants to get rich quick, but I'm not in that game. I'm more in a game of knowing what the trend is. It's like in the first auto race, they brought out somebody to, I can't think of who it was. He ended up owning a petroleum company. But he watched the race, they're going around about 5 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour is the most boring thing he's ever seen in his life. And people are all excited about it, belching smoke and all this stuff. They got the goggles down. McKeel should be here. And he said, what do you think? This is going to be great. You want to invest in a racetrack? He goes, no, not yet. It's going to be a long time. What makes the car go? And that's the difference in thinking. Because he knew cars are going to become more and more popular, and whatever makes this combustion engine run, he wants to invest in. The racetrack, he's going to lose money for a long time before it finally catches on. If it's okay, I'd like to say very sincerely what an honor this was for me. Very few people, my friends, some of them don't even know what I do for a living. They just say, you traveling a lot? What do I tell them? I'm a motivational speaker? I don't think so. I'm an advisor? Oh, yeah, well, okay. I mean, there's nothing to tell them. So a lot of them, they just say, so how you doing? My clients know me intimately. They know exactly what I do. And to have somebody, Martin Bergman was 103 years old when he died. He was a very famous analyst from Boston. And I was lucky enough to have spent a lot of time with Martin. He wrote a book on love. Illegible. Don't read it. It's just way too out here. But in the end, we were able to ask him, Mark, what is love? Simply. He said, love is accepting the other after they're fully known. Damn good. And a lot of the clients that are in this room today, you included, know me pretty well. And you still invited me. It's baffling to me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You happy?
Mark, stay up here, though.
Okay.
I got a couple of quick closing comments.
Awesome.
First, I got to tell you what. One, you absolutely blew me away today. In a number of areas. I mean, Joni and I were in Rome, Tuscany, 10 days with most of our family. And we were there actually 12 months ago. And I got to tell you what, something which just occurred to me, I'm just throwing this out there, Mark knows me pretty well. But maybe we'll figure out how to pay you in lira. Just kidding. But the point, wouldn't it be awesome? You go to Rome, and you go to other parts, and if you would join us, because it's both education and fun. When you can learn and spend company and grow, that's magic, because that does not happen very often.
I could tour guide all the small cities.
That's right. I'm thinking of that's what I mean. So this
Yeah.
may be something, but relative to today, question for you, Mark. How long have you and Denise been there?
30 years this September.
Denise is right. That's good. And I tell you what, I think I'd like for us to give a round of applause to Denise. Give thanks to her, because I have no doubt after 30 years, she has helped to evolve and move Mark in the right direction.
Now you're going to get me emotional.
So I want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
No, honestly, it is good. You know, it's like a Facebook thumbs up. Second,
Oh, don't Facebook me. I'm not on, I'm on, but it's not me. I have somebody do it.
how many feel that you've been challenged, you know, in how you think? Raise your hand.
Wow.
You know, how many of you enjoyed this time together? Raise your hand. You feel a bit motivated to do something? Raise your hand. You know, and honestly, that's what this is all about. You know, it's not just YPO or YPO Gold. That is what this is all about, the power of one. You're moving us in the right direction, both of them.
Thanks, John.
You know, and from a mechanics perspective, you know, one, we've got, and it's an interesting time, we got October 24th, you know, it's fight night, you know, ballistics, where politics and bliss become one and the same. It's at a neat museum, okay, the Gerald R. Ford Museum, October 24th. It's with the YPO group. It'll be fun, it'll be entertaining, it will be challenging. It should be a blast. Next, we've got the holiday party coming up here, December 10th. Okay, that will be both festive, different, and unique in a number of ways. Excited about that, and Joni's driving that. Third, and this really comes up in January, Molly and Steve will be hosting not just us, the Gold Group, but also YPO up at Boeing. On Friday, we're also going to have a little bit of an intimate time, a fireside chat, Boeing the brand, with Molly and Steve. You know, sign up for that. Especially if you want a suite. You know, because one, you know, we're like, sort of like, you know, we got 5 kids, grandkids, daughters-in-law, son-in-laws. We're sort of like a rock band. I thought it was cool. You talk about how behavior changes. Get a phone call in July on my cell phone. Says, you know, dear Mr. Steefield, this is such and such, you know, from Boeing. We just finished our winter rates. You know, giving you a call because, you know, you're just, you know, you're important, but there's always some logistical issues we got to work through. And honestly, when we come up there, we have a blast, but it's a number of rooms. We have a suite because I tell you what, I love my wife, so mom and dad, husband and wife, we want some privacy, our own time. But book, especially if you want a suite, make it easy on Molly and Steve. Book your space now. It's going to be a great weekend. It's going to be family. It's going to be competitive. And I got to tell you what, how many of you have been to a Molly and Kersher weekend in the past? Raise your hand.
Oh, boy.
I can't get the eagle nest out of my mind from.
It is an absolute blast, never a dull moment, a surprise and delight. So in closing, I want to say thank you very, very much. We're downstairs at 616. Let's give Joe and Mark a hand one more time. And this young man is going to join us.
I
Thank
will.
you very, very much.
I'll sign a book for whoever wants one.
Oh, you've got some books outside?
They're
Sign
free.
as well.
Free.
Free. All right.
Thank you. Nice tie up. And thanks for